Today, the RBA's confusion-driven paralysis. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and problem news with a distinctively Australian flavour. On Friday, the RBA published a document in response to a Freedom of Information request. And this FOI related to an email that was sent internally by somebody leaving the bank. And it's actually a very interesting commentary from the inside about what the bank is thinking and doing. So I want to take you through that email first and then discuss some of the consequences more broadly. This is what the email said. There are two sides to central banking. There is a useful function, such as setting interest rates, where if you do it well, people are better off. And there is a ceremonial function, such as conferences, hosting international visitors, large parts of the SMP, the Statement of Monetary Policy, and many other things I won't mention, where you do it to be polite, for a warm inner glow, or because we've always done it. Farewell speeches, he said, are definitely in the latter category, the ceremonial function, but I have always hated that side of work. It always annoys me when people leave and they don't explain why. So I will try to explain. And I'm sorry to disappoint those who were hoping for something more gracious and ceremonial. The RBA has an unusually strong sense of community and loyalty. There is a downside to that, but it also means that leaving is an occasion of sadness and regret, which I feel strongly. I will miss many close friends and colleagues that I respect. The following comments should be interpreted in that context. And then went on to say, my time at the bank has been mixed. Some things have been great and some things have been bad. I will mention the frustrations first because they explain why I'm going. Like most of you, I want a career where I serve the public interest. My main reason for leaving is that I no longer believe the RBA does that. It isn't just that I disagree, it's more fundamental. I think the decisions are bad because the processes are bad. There is little deliberation. Opposing views are not taken into account. Decision makers seem hostile to a consideration of evidence or research. The bank says that the disagreements it has with mainstream macroeconomics are differences of judgment. But if that were so, then the bank would explain its position explicitly and in detail, addressing obvious counter-arguments. It doesn't. Perhaps because it knows its arguments are contradicted by the evidence. Our disagreements over the zero bound or financial stability reflect judgment in the way that disagreements over climate change, the health effects of tobacco, or vaccinations reflect judgment. It would be more accurate to say that one side respects the research while the other side believes what it wants to believe. I am most frustrated by the bank's reluctance to be honest and open. The bank says things about the effect of policy on confidence, the likelihood of the zero bound, the effectiveness of policy, the effect of interest rates on financial instability, the effects of negative interest rates, and so on, that are contradicted by internal and external research. But we don't even acknowledge that, let alone respond to it. I recognise that these problems are not the bank's fault. We have a board that does not understand monetary policy or statistical research. FOI legislation greatly stifles policy deliberation. The media misreports us. The public criticises errors of commission and ignores errors of omission. So although there are lots of great people at the bank, our environment makes the organisation dysfunctional. Whatever the reason, I do not belong here. That said, there are also big parts of my job that I loved and will miss, in particular writing RDPs, where I felt the RBA made major contributions to public discussion. For this, I was blessed with great co-authors. Now, this is what Bloomberg said about this FOI. Australia's central bank does little deliberation, ignores opposing views, and its decision makers seem hostile to a consideration of evidence or research, according to Peter Tulip, a former senior member of its economic research department. We have a board that does not understand monetary policy or statistical research, Tulip said in a farewell email to colleagues when he resigned from the Reserve Bank in August, according to a Freedom of Information release on Friday. So, although there are lots of great people at the bank, our environment makes the organisation dysfunctional. His comments come about a week after former Prime Minister Paul Keating criticised the central bank for failing to do everything it could to help the government finance programmes that would combat unemployment. Tulip, in an August interview, said the RBA's senior leadership had failed to make a compelling case against deploying negative interest rates to help revive the economy. The RBA's board comprises of the governor, his deputy, the head of the Treasury, and 6 independent members drawn primarily from industry. The RBA cut its cash rate to 0.25% at an emergency meeting in March and set a 0.25% target on the 3-year bond yield to lower borrowing costs across the economy, as well as implementing a lending facility for banks that was boosted last month. RBA Governor Philip Lowe has said negative rates are extraordinarily unlikely in Australia, citing potential downsides on consumption and sentiment. The bank says things about the effect of policy on confidence, the likelihood of the zero bound, the effectiveness of policy, the effect of interest rates on financial instability, the effects of negative interest rates, and so on, that are contradicted by internal and external research, he wrote in the August the 12th letter. But we don't even acknowledge that, let alone respond to it. Like most of you, I want a career where I serve the public interest, Tulip said. My main reason for leaving is that I no longer believe the RBA does that. It isn't just that I disagree, it's more fundamental. I think the decisions are bad because the processes are bad. There is little deliberation. Opposing views are not taken into account. The RBA board convenes its monthly meeting on Tuesday and is expected to keep policy unchanged ahead of the government's budget due a few hours later. Now, Dr. Tulip is chief economist at the Centre for Independent Studies now and published an article on Friday agreeing with Mr. Keating, further arguing that there is something structurally wrong at the RBA and that most board members were business leaders with little economics training or monetary policy background. He confirmed with the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age that he was the author of the RBA FOI note, but declined to say whether his views are widely held among staff at the central bank, saying he'd prefer others spoke for themselves. But this is what he wrote. Last week, Paul Keating blasted the Reserve Bank of Australia for its indolence and timidity. He complained the RBA was too slow to raise interest rates in the late 1980s, then was too slow to bring them down again in the early 1990s, and now again the bank is dithering. This is a recurring problem. We also saw it in the RBA's tardy response to the mining boom, which saw the CPI rise by 5% in 2008 to be saved by the GFC. In recent years, inflation has consistently been below the target of 2 to 3%, while unemployment has substantially exceeded sustainable levels. Instead of doing the job Parliament assigned it, the RBA fretted about financial stability, a problem that interest rates do not solve. Not surprisingly, formal research finds a pattern of excessive inertia. As Keating argues, there is something structurally wrong at the RBA. These errors are too systemic to be attributed to a few mistakes by selected individuals. One explanation is the composition of the RBA board. Most board members are business leaders with little training in economics and no background in monetary policy. People without relevant expertise lack confidence in their decisions and move timidly, even after the need for action has become obvious. The result is confusion-driven paralysis. The lack of expertise on the board is a problem for other reasons. Most board members are not equipped to seriously challenge, let alone disagree with the governor. When the governor makes a mistake, the board is unable to identify it, much less correct it. These issues place recent debates on monetary policy in perspective. Several academics have argued for a change in the RBA's target, for example, to nominal GDP or a price level. However, if the RBA is unwilling to meet its objectives, tweaking those objectives is missing the point. It's like a cricket coach telling a bowler which stump to aim at, when the bowler can't even land the ball on the pitch. We need to fix the RBA's structure and incentives before we start fine-tuning its objectives. To which I would add, well, we're getting close now to understanding the core structural issue that we have in Australia, and that is that the RBA and the regulators, ASIC and APRA, all of course connected back through to Treasury, are frankly missing the point and have been partially responsible, nay, majorly responsible, for a number of the policy missteps that we've had over the past 20 years. Unless we move to a structurally different arrangement, with very different roles and accountabilities, we won't be able to climb out of the hole that we've been digging. So, good on Peter Tulip for calling it out, but I'm not sure that those in power will take much notice, because they haven't up to this point and seem committed to just digging in the same direction, even if that's straight down towards a non-reversible black hole. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.